I'm not tough enough to keep standing. Okay. So the next section is how the functions of government work together. The general purpose of government is to be a social contract that all citizens living within the government subscribe to and abide by. It is essential for the government as a whole to work in a coordinated fashion that instills benefits for all, and it is the methods that intertwine the different areas of government that become a tool to be used to seek what is good and right. Legislators propose methods for how the executive functions, what laws must be enforced, and regulations must be monitored, and the judicial branch creates a review of the practicalities to make sure no previous legislation is misconstrued and how new legislation is appropriate. It is a conundrum of sorts that the government needs to be divided into three in order to maintain coherence for governing. Why does the government need to be divided in the first place? One explanation is given in a similar regard to why three leaders are better than two, and that you must dispel any 50-50 fracturing and prevent a single entity from becoming too powerful. It should also be noted that the three primary functions of government are persistent across almost every modern nation, unless in a totalitarian or authoritarian regime where the executive holds almost all the power. But even in this scenario, courts and lawmakers still play a significant role in the governing of civilians. So on to constitutions, the next section. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That is the United States Preamble to the Constitution. The first statement of the Preamble obviously explains that the following words are established and stated by the Founding Fathers and therefore the American people. They were to establish the Constitution to form a more perfect union, or in their case, a union of people and entities of states, supplanting the loose articles that held the separation of the states, previously oppressed by separation due to occupation by the British Empire. Establish justice as the most righteous of goals as ordained, but also the most potentially detrimental, as it can impose harsh sanctions against individuals for the alleged good of the nation. However, justice must be served as ordained in order to form a more perfect union and a social contract, which the Constitution naturally incorporated. Ensuring domestic tranquility is the enforcing and establishing of virtuous peacefulness and agreements amongst neighbors and distant countrymen so that the previously mentioned more perfect union may be secured. Tranquility, as it would have been understood by the Founding Fathers, would have been a domestic understanding that provided for the betterment of the governed entity they sought to construct. The next two statements of providing for the common defense and general welfare can be considered in various ways, but the founders would have been seeking domestic and foreign serenity. The common defense helps protect the American people from other nations, and general welfare can be fostered from within as a result of that common defense. The blessings of liberty to our posterity are divine searches for freedom by the American people for themselves and the future of the nation. Liberty is the right to seek more freedoms, as all individuals have a natural right to do, and the American people are committed to increasing those freedoms continuously. The Constitution was ordained and established as the government framework for the United States, and being ordained, it was approved by God for the good of the nation, as well as the founders themselves, and established legally as the law of the land. The United States Constitution is the edifice of the world's greatest nation. It's the alpha and omega of government function and procedure, and it is the default document referenced regarding legal discrepancies. It is the backbone of the United States government. The importance of the Constitution is unmatched, and its contents are the domestic design of a nation that has stood the test of time. The current United States government was established by the Constitution and followed the Articles of Confederation, which had a relatively short lifespan. The Founding Fathers could not possibly have realized the long-standing implications of arguably the greatest historical document in the world. The definition of a constitution is listed as being a body of fundamental principles or established precedents, according to which a state or other organization is acknowledged to be governed and the Constitution of the United States and its amendments is a doctrine well prescribed for governing the state of the United States. Generally, the Constitution sets forth three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. Each has its own function and sets of checks and balances that can be enacted to deter other branches from skirting their duties. This basic principle of the Constitution barely captures the magnitude of the document's usefulness, though. And although there are arguments, such as original against living or continuing interpretation, there is no doubt that the Constitution trumps all legal constitutions in the United States, such as those prescribed by the individual states. A combination of originalism and living interpretation can be congruently recognized as viable positions in viewing the Constitution. Originalism is the idea of basing the constitutional text on the intentions of the founders who wrote the original source. Interpretation or living interpretation is where the constitutional text is open to changing meanings depending on the place and time of relating the text to law. In relation to the interpretations of legal text, such as the Constitution, originalism is the idea that an interpretation should hold the original public meanings of the authors at the time the text was written or became legally binding. An original meaning of legal text can be found mostly through books, such as dictionaries, and from legal documents, which are similar to the text to be interpreted, or from notes and other texts from the writers. Original meaning is also possibly discerned from public occurrences and debates that took place during the relevant time frame. Originalism is considered an objective legal construct. It is separate from what could be considered the intentions of the writers or the applications they expected. Originalism is usually contrasted with what is called living constitutional interpretation. These living constitutionalists typically believe that the meaning of the legal text changes over time. They do not believe that an amendment is required to change the meaning of the Constitution. Under this logic, social attitudes of the relevant period could construe negative constitutional rights against the public. Originalism is similar to and could be considered a precursor of constitutionalism. The following purposes are considered to underline the United States Constitution could be impeded by living constitutionalism, setting up or constituting the institutions that form the national government, the division and allocation of power, the Constitution serving a gag rule, restraining of passionate moments, frameworking for private ordering, system of intergenerational lawmaking, promotion of the rule of law, promotion of democracy, certainty for things to be in writing, and the possibility to lead to good consequences. These can all be elaborated on further. The Constitution could be considered the legal requisite for lawmaking. It is the structuring and limiting of governmental powers, and it is possible, of course, for the Constitution's text to be in unambiguous and accurate terms, where functioning is proliferated and controversies are limited, when the text is more concrete in nature. The majority of the provisions, however, in the Constitution could be considered abstract or incompatible in relation to modern times, and many of the terms used in the Constitution are not accurately defined. Over time, the obscure wording of the Constitution has been the subject of ferocious debate. Interpretation has managed to change drastically, for better or worse, as the nation has advanced and matured. For example, the ability to regulate commerce did not begin with the regulation of manufacturing or even protect basic rights for workers. But as things progress, the nation and the ability to regulate commerce has become something that could not have been foreseen by the founding fathers. Congress now has almost unlimited discretion in enacting worker protections and dismantling rabid manufacturing practices. This is common in constitutional interpretation. As times change, so does legislative practice. Another example of this is the First Amendment right to free speech, which was impeded by accusations of sedition in the case of libel, whereas critical discussion of public authority is now encouraged. And racial segregation is the most obvious and unfortunately exonerated example of the Equal Protection Clause being interpreted differently over time. Although there has been no alteration to the constitutional text, the evolution of the meaning of such continues to take place. The significance of this fact is extraordinary. Contrary to the belief that the Constitution is structural in itself and stands outside of political swaying, democratic constitutionalism is an argument against strict constitutional stability of sorts. Democratic constitutionalism would argue against the arduous process of enacting amendments as the only way to change originalistic meanings of the text. It stands against that of originalists who hold that the Constitution is a form of contract that strictly binds those who live under its authority. And granted, there are certain portions of the Constitution where its role is severe in literal meaning. Such examples of this are the creation of Congress and its being bicameral in structure, as well as the presidential right to veto legislation. These prove to be what some may consider an outline for the government. This account does not do the Constitution justice completely, though, as much of it is left in ambiguity, continuously evolving since their ratification or the many clauses included. Interpretation of such clauses arguably must change with the times for success in governmental and societal testing. Judicial review is an extremely common location of constitutional interpretation to be attained. In the case of judicial review of constitutional text, convictions held by the populace are morphed into law. Liberal and conservative, as well as sometimes socialist, views and understandings have coincided at different points to produce an interpretation of a varied nature. It is quite possible for constitutional interpretation to react and contract with differing political ideologies. Contemporary values are regularly upheld by the Supreme Court, and it has on a few occasions regarded the Constitution as a cemented political contract. The authority of the Constitution must be approved by each generation of the current population, and the Constitution is arguably part historical document and part morphing societal tool. There is a growing fear that if the Constitution is interpreted too severely, other more structural designs derived from the document could be changed substantially. This is a defining feature of originalism. They seem to hope that preventing interpretation as much as possible would limit debate and controversy over provisions. The main argument against originalism is obviously that no one living today has had any say in the ratification of the Constitution or in its contents. How then are people obliged to live by its doctrines? The possibility of being locked into a contract written by strangers is naturally foreign, and making and substantiating amendments is hardly a remedy. The federal court system and judges therein are arguably our best tool created by the void area of the Constitution to protect people from alien practicalities. Originalists would conceive that those judges are bound in a somewhat mechanical way to the Constitution's meaning. This logic does not resonate, however, because if this held true, historians would then be the authority on legislation, and they argue more than Congresspeople. Constitutional interpretation is a process, hence taking place over a period and not a momentary glimpse of a political view. The common law is a conspicuous example in that it shows what law has become rather than simply what it is. It evolves with time. It can be scary that judicial review has such a power as to amend the Constitution to its opinionated perspective. Democracy can be thwarted by uneducated or irresponsible judges. However, the court system does not have the final say in what the law is. Simply interpreting legal text in one way or another sparks much controversy, which leads to more political deliberation. Constitutional interpretation is hence ultimately decided upon by the people rather than the courts. Opposition to judicial review can be great and change future legislation and review accordingly. It has been argued much that court decisions should be considered more of a guide, whereas public opinion is the actual direction chosen. So, this book, I have a lot of work to do. Like I said, it's only 30% done. The next section is on globalization, and it reads: The United States of America is the greatest nation to ever bless this fine world, the world being our present reality. And the planet lived with the United States being the greatest of all countries. It has maintained an undisputed dominant position since the collapse of the Soviet Union and has held China, the second largest country, or the second largest economy, at bay. It has the largest military, economic, and cultural influence, and all three have continued to expand at a rate that procures its status as the best and favorite nation of all. There are blatantly obvious signs that do not revolve around statistics or simplified facts. Driving through the United States will show a level of wealth consistency that demonstrates a sophisticated nation throughout, and the sheer size and population of the nation show its grandiose level of success. The United States leads the world in almost every science or scholarly activity, and its doctors are unmatched. They are one of the most diverse nations on the planet, and no other nation realistically compares when looking at the basic size and shape of the general population. Their stance on freedom and individual rights to justice and liberty and the steadfast hold on those beliefs skyrockets them past any other nation that dares to claim to be the true leader of Western society. Before diving into any easily identifiable nationalistic beliefs shared by many United States citizens, there are some important statistics that should be showcased. The United States has the most powerful military, the largest economy, the most political influence, and a moral code that puts it on a level unheard of. There is no doubt that whichever path the United States chooses to take, the whole of Europe, half of Africa, half of the Middle East, most of South America, large portions of Southeast Asia, and all the Pacific major will trust to follow. And although that may be on a great day and not on the United States' worst, it's the citizens of those countries that will truly follow the lead of the United States with or without their government support. It is a simple reality that American television, music, political landscapes, infrastructure policies, fiscal policies, global attitudes, news and journalism, technology, and the US dollar itself are appreciated by the rest of the world with or without their gratitude. In the Middle East alone, the United States has been in the Middle East alone, the United States has been involved in every single war since being attacked 24 years ago on September 11th. An example would be the governments that dare to support anti-American rhetoric when half of all battles in the Middle East have been won with American support, weapons, and money. So the whole of the current reality of the Middle East has been influenced directly and consistently by the United States, which always puts progress, growth, and civic respect first. This is just an example. Others include financial support to African nations, political support for South American leaders, military support for European nations, and large-scale joint military operations with Southeast Asia. This does not scratch the surface of all the free trade agreements that the United States has with the free world itself, also known as Western society. Now on war and military compositions. War and the violence, oppression, and sadness that come with it are the worst things that have ever plagued humanity. War creates horrible conditions for those unwilling to be participants and takes away the opportunity cost of time spent living normally. To the dismay of those who have experienced it, it is a problem that has existed since the beginning of humanity and still continues to this day. It should be taken as a sign that the most popular form of historical study is the study of war, and war is rampant in cultures and media around the world. Technology has developed from massive amounts of bodies colliding with the same to tactical and effective killing through quick and deadly means. Whilst this technology has advanced, sinister technologies have become popular and unpopular over time, coming into and fading from existence. Some examples are the use of gases and hot tar. In modern times, there are rules to conventional warfare, and a moral code is sought after during the pursuit of mass killing. It is inappropriate to think this moral code is always adhered to, as desperation and a will to win are usually employed on the ground in the actual realities of battle. Many are quick to have a bloodlust for war and killing while not knowing the reality of a prolonged period of a hostile and dangerous environment. Yet war continues for either the benefit or the destruction of society as a whole and individual groupings of people. There is a romanticizing of war that quickly becomes erased when experienced, and there is no need to ever experience warfare in a lifetime. There is always a justification for war, whether true or false, or it being a complicated matter. The primary reasons for war are the vanity of those in charge, cultural differences, religion, moral reasoning, and desperation. Modern conventional war is overall an extremely negative experience and never subtle or attractive for unwilling participants who are displaced, hurt, or otherwise negatively impacted by soldiers who are actively killing people. If war is to take place, there should always be a righteous and moral code to the mass killing of others. Quick deaths are essential, and modern war, through the use of advanced technology, has provided a means for a morally correct way to remove soldiers from the battlefield. The ideal way to kill an enemy combatant is to destroy their awareness instantly through a headshot to the head. The worst way to kill an enemy combatant is through torture, usually in the form of fear tactics, but also true physical torture. An important point to note is that although the devastation of war and the main revelations regarding it have remained the same when confined to the same area. Modern wars superior to ancient wars without the use of guns. It is preferable to die from a bullet to the brain or even quickly bleed out from gunshot wounds than to die from suffocation under blood, sweat, and sharp metals. Fighting a war requires a military, and the military might be efficient and organized, or it might be a type of mob with amateur weapons. Being placed in charge of a military during times of war is a grand responsibility and one that only a few get to truly experience. Often wars span years and age and stress all of those who are involved, but winning the war is usually a purpose and calling that unites the violent passions of the winning side. This means that winning a war might be existential and therefore require all support allowed in the employment of immoral tactics. When fighting a war, it must be decisively decided how evil one's inside will become in order to achieve victory. Doing unordinary harm to an adversary has obvious uses and benefits, but to achieve a lasting opportunity for peace after large-scale violence requires beneficence and adherence to human rights and moral codes. Fighting a conventional war in the modern era also requires strategy and knowledge of the tools available for killing. The circumstances surrounding a war zone determine the actions of soldiers inside the war zone and whether offensive or defensive goals are being strived for, and the purposes for the war and the conditions in order to achieve victory must all be considered. It should be noted that the guidance presented here revolves around fighting wars, nothing more and nothing less, and trying to win while maintaining a sometimes admittedly vague approach to moral codes and respect for human rights. Employing all the tactics and tools here is for the discretion of the political leadership and the military. Often, leaders get really good at conducting war to the point where the use of officers in advising roles is just another formality for the very top commanders, and all decisions become the leader's decisions. A strong military is organized into units, and units can be broken down further, combined, or separated into a structure that is not easily manipulated because the parts are organized into the most efficient way possible. Soldiers should be methodically placed into units and subdivisions based on merit, compatibility, and tactical usage. Further, a military should be divided into armies, then regiments, then battalions, then companies, then platoons, and then finally squads, all with a bureaucracy of responsibilities in administering the subdivisions below them, all the way to interpersonal maintenance and growth between squad members. Officials are also methodically placed and utilized and promoted based on merit, experience, and overall effectiveness. However, it is extremely critical that all volunteers, recruits, or enlisted have a pathway to becoming an officer as easily as the officers themselves had. Promotion should be spread across all levels of the military, forming a single linear progression to the top position, with benefits and duties supplemented accordingly. There should always be an incentive for promotion, whether it be financial compensation, national pride, or hatred for an adversary. Armies should have the tools to help them, and when on the battlefield should be able to share equipment, intelligence, and firepower seamlessly, and be able to employ air support and reinforcements from an integrated military that is united. For example, if an air force is organizationally divided from a land force, it is required for that land force to have some sort of access to the resources of the air force when needed. The same idea is employed when land forces have aquatic needs and hence call for naval support, etc. Armies, as described in this book, are simply groupings with a central command. Whether forces are divided based on land, sea, or air has no effect on the establishment of an army, which is simply a large unit on a grand scale with one leader who is responsible to the leader of the whole military. An example would be having an army stationed domestically, another on the front lines, and then an army based in allied territory or foreign defensive positions, therefore making three separate armies, all with three unique central commands and inherent soldier positions, all responsible to the command of the entire military. Dividing the military into branches of purpose is useful for tradition, administrative organization, and training purposes. Having a force devoted to a specialty allows for advanced research and education into that specialty. However, when fighting an actual war, it is having a somewhat autonomous and flexible multitude of standing armies that allows for commands to be delegated in a decisive and quickly actionable manner. For example, common sense tells us that having a military split into three sections based on air, land, or sea is much less effective than having a military split into three sections with a mix of air, land, and sea forces being proportionate and stationed accordingly to the mission. A versatile force in war is more dangerous than a specialized one. Specialized forces' inherent weaknesses, opposite to their strengths, can be simplified and solved through rock, paper, scissors attrition. Codes need to be written and instituted, outlining all laws and intentions of the military. Human rights need to be considered, and battle codes need to be adhered to in order to keep a fighting force in line. This means the overall atmosphere of a military must be considered as well. What is the morality of the units? Are they going to rape, pillage, and utterly terrify their adversaries? Or will they garner support through righteousness and swift retribution? Or will they invoke divine judgment and restitution? These questions determine the aesthetic and ambiance of the military. Officer qualifications should be stricter as the rank improves and can be set and adapted through conventional means. Rank should be uniform throughout the whole military in a way that allows transfers, education, and experience to thrive. All members of the military should not have barriers to becoming an officer if they are of the same usefulness or provide even more utility than their superiors. The best human rights code is a simple one, which is to kill without torturing. The objective of a just military is to kill as many enemies without needlessly torturing them. Fear tactics and propaganda can still be employed while maintaining a just and righteous persona that garners support and can be openly discussed, adapted, and improved without needless investigation, backtracking, or stoking more opposition. If torturous tactics are employed, pathways for escape and surrender of the adversary must also be supplied to balance the moral scale, and if launching attacks on civilian areas warning should be given. Charisma and propaganda have effects on the military's morale and affect political maneuvering and the institution of sabotage and insurrection in a foreign area. The stature of leadership and their ability to cultivate support among the involved and non-involved population determine the effectiveness of public relations campaigns which are implemented to drive momentum of the war in favor of one side. Political maneuvering should include pressure on foreign entities in addition to improving public relations, helping to encourage a populace to obstruct the enemy and support allies. Manipulating the local populace to help in aiding the military is essential, and if invading another nation, a military must sabotage all facets of the enemy's infrastructure. It is also important to maintain sabotage practices for long periods after the war has ceased to keep an adversary down or to appoint friendly politicians to facilitate a change in leadership of a land. The ability to gather and produce munitions is essential, and communication and transparency with major arms dealers and manufacturers will help solidify steady inflows of supplies to be used in war. Finding lower prices in a competitive market is helpful, as the more ammunition one possesses, the less likely they are to run out, which necessitates the expenditure of further resources, whether it be fuel for retreat or human capital for strategizing. Ammunition supply and supplies for all areas of battle must be maintained and are a major focus of strategy for any military. Global and local supply chains must be defended or hidden, and supplies may include food, fuel, and other equipment needed in addition to basic munitions and advanced missiles, weaponry, etc. Stealing and gathering supplies from the defeated enemy is tactful, and all stolen ammunition should be used as quickly as possible, if not compatible with the conventions of the stealing military. It is extremely important to have a devoted civilian population that can produce resources to provide for war. Manufacturing and asset conversion are essential for creating a war machine that provides ammunition, vehicles, human capital, training, etc. to the military. Advice from officer advisors and the autonomous operation of large units can be utilized at the beginning of a war, especially to help determine a long-term strategy and set whoever is the head-all leader into a combat leadership role. When determining strategies, it is important to acknowledge the locations of enemy positions, and advancements in targeting mechanisms can be utilized for doing so. This leads to incorporating satellite positioning systems as well as integrated field technologies to coordinate operations once positioning intelligence has been established. Almost all larger munitions use location data for determining strike points, so strategies are dependent on how far the enemy's advancing lines are. Artillery can be adjusted to fire anywhere between half a mile to approximately 5 to 10 miles away or 15 kilometers, and missiles can strike even further. Trust me, bro. Booby traps are extremely useful for defending areas that do not need to be occupied often or consistently. These are often inhumane, so the maiming of enemy combatants should be limited and avoided if possible. However, there is no alternative to the placing of landmines and other hidden explosives during a tactical retreat or the booby trapping of a known enemy objective. Morale can be extended across all armies and the military as a whole, or it can be localized to the squad and platoons, and does not have to be constrained by any established boundaries. Improving morale improves everything else, and momentum is typically shifted to represent the fighting force with the higher morale. Morale is best improved by seemingly limitless supplies and resources, but can also be improved through transparency, motivational speaking, and other charismatic acts that play on the emotions of soldiers and civilian populations. Missiles come in various sizes and degrees of explosiveness. Today's technology allows advanced missiles to change trajectory while traveling at least double the speed of sound. Missile barrages inspire fear and allow for large-scale destruction of an isolated area. Larger cruise missiles are accurate and precise and allow for devastation hundreds of miles or kilometers from their launch point. Missiles, however, are expensive, as are the systems needed to fire them, and should be used for decisive battlefield-changing operations if of limited supply. Missiles are the primary tool for destroying other missiles, tanks, and ships, as well as striking infrastructure deep in enemy territory. Automated weaponry, missile defense systems, and other anti-aircraft, anti-tank, and anti-ship batteries use automatic turrets to fire upon small vessels, tanks, helicopters, etc. These require large amounts of capital to purchase and install and are immovable. They also require specialists, such as trained operators and engineers, to employ, further reducing flexibility and increasing costs. They are vulnerable to being overloaded by large amounts of objects being fired and deployed at once, and are also susceptible to extremely fast-moving objects and sabotage. It is important for both moral and strategy to tactfully and methodically incorporate retreating and reinforcement practices into the battlefield. It should be noted that all dimensions of war discussed thus far are dependent on battlefield conditions, political atmospheres, terrain, previous encounters, etc., and are best adapted to actual conditions and are based on army structure and officer capabilities. An essential part of war is determining the location for outposts and defensible positions across a geographical area. This is dependent on physical features and man-made structures and improvements. It is also dependent on access points and whether there are roads to and from specific locations, and whether those roads and routes are able to allow for vehicle transport, tanks, or simply walking infantry. How fast outposts can be established and positions occupied is essential information. As a baseline, a defensible command post, albeit temporary, should be able to be established within an hour at any reasonable location by a modern army. Integrated field technologies include information sharing and unit coordination through a system that is easy to use and displayed in an understandable and usable format. For example, it is essential for the modern-day infantrymen to be able to communicate with superior officers, gain logistical support, acknowledge troop and combatant locations, coordinate with air support, use advanced weaponry and equipment, and complete objectives, all while using conventional weapons such as rifles and small arms. The infantry is the foundation, backbone, and main weapon of the modern-day military, and each infantryman should be equipped with the proper gear and ammunition and have the basic training needed to fight in a war. They should be supplied with support and information as needed and reinforced with other infantrymen. Their main weapon is the modern-day rifle, and they usually have other specializations and are tasked with the unique duties of their station or rank. Infantry is the most flexible type of military unit and the most common. They have the ability to adapt through the use of human mental capacity and can adjust and respond as needed to battlefield conditions more effectively than any other entity involved in the war. The primary purpose of the infantry is to win the battle and thus the war as a whole, and kill as many of the enemy as possible while achieving strategic goals. Drones are often on the battlefield as equipment to help infantry and other conventional soldiers, but they are also incorporated as planes and underwater vehicles. Mostly today, they are utilized in a helicopter-like format the size of a basket and can carry explosives and surveil the battlefield for clearing structures. Rovers on wheels are used as they are for clearing mines and other explosives as well. Winged drones can fly at the same altitude as large aircraft and can be equipped with missiles and stealth technology that allow for targeted strikes and air support. Underwater unmanned vehicles are superior to manned vehicles, typically for their ability to travel faster, sink to lower depths, be quieter, and not include all the difficulties that are inherent in submarine warfare. Drones should always be mass produced and sent for fighting on the battlefield whenever possible. The issue that makes things complicated is weighing the financial worth of drones against the worth of human lives that the drone replaces. Tanks and other vehicles equipped with weapons are useful for fast and aggressive assaults on enemy positions. Being able to advance miles or kilometers in minutes has obvious tactical advantages, and the weaponry equipped to vehicles and tanks can be placed in temporary defensive locations to create a weaponized and fortifiable position. Vehicles are used to transport troops as well, and all land machines that require traction are subordinate to physical geography and already existing roads and infrastructure. Artillery and mortars are great standard ways to slow an enemy advance and can displace the enemy or destroy positions from afar. Another advantage is the cost of firing these types of explosives. Artillery shells and mortar rounds are typically much cheaper than the alternative, which is usually the firing of missiles. Air support must always be available to the infantry and ground vehicles who request it. This can come in the form of planes or helicopters, and the type of such vehicles is dependent on the task at hand. Often planes are useful for major substantial strikes, while helicopters are more useful for intermediate tactical operations, such as providing cover fire and firing larger arms, such as missiles in proximity. Planes are quicker and can drop bombs, fire missiles, and strike enemy positions through the use of jet fighters and bombers behind enemy lines. Also, intel is gathered by aerial vehicles, and troop transport is carried out via helicopter, while supply transports are usually airlifted by plane. Of course, if no ground-to-air defense systems are available, then air-to-air maneuvering may be required as necessary. It is important to understand how expensive aircraft are and the time it takes to replace them, as well as the cost associated with training operators. Losing aircraft is typically a major loss in the modern era. Satellites are utilized by the military in the same way they are utilized by the civilian population and can be accessed by both local populations and militias, or be organized traditional or by organized traditional militaries. Satellites do not have weapons, as there are many regulations and agreements blocking warfare in space. But the global positioning systems we have today are major tools used for violent means and ends and essential for intelligence gathering and troop coordination. Intelligence gathering is carried out by spies and other populations of loyal and disloyal agents, as well as by any other means possible. Intelligence or information on the enemy is the required input for outputs, such as strategies and for measuring circumstances and the significance of victories or losses. Sea assets include all the ships and carriers of a navy and are essential for any fighting on water. Ships can provide a role as a command center and are often equipped with state-of-the-art technology for integrating operations across multiple fronts, as well as being outfitted with more than satisfactory amounts of weaponry. They can fire all types of weapons, from missiles to underwater torpedoes to drones to unmanned aircraft to turret systems to cyber weapons to the institutional logistical support and sabotage. Some of the most recent developments of modern day warfare that are indicative of where warfare is headed are the implementation of artificial intelligence and strategizing, coordinating intelligence gathering, and of course killing. Drone swarms have been rumored to be a thing, soon to be relevant, and robotics will continue to improve military capabilities for years to come. In fact, any type of automation will work congruently with human soldiers to enhance and improve their capabilities for defeating enemies in war. Cyber warfare and hacking are also prominent means for confusing, disabling, inhibiting, and killing enemies, and two types of weapons or types of warfare, not often discussed as they most likely would bring about the end of the world, are electromagnetic and nuclear weapons. These are not to be used in a conventional war except for isolated electromagnetic detonations for disabling small structures or areas of military presence. Nuclear warheads should never be used, as the condemnation from the world is not worth their use, and they have an extremely high chance of initiating a chain reaction of events that almost definitely result in more nuclear warheads being fired in radiation clouds and the subsequent end of war in the world with no winner. To summarize, all of these tools and discussions need to be assessed in detail, and strategies for incorporating all facets of the military must be implemented. Determining the lengths a group will go to destroy another group militarily will determine the overall atmosphere and aesthetic of a military. Also, it's helpful to maintain a centralized military divided into other centralized armies that all incorporate air, land, and sea tactics rather than divided branches to specialized areas of war. Infantry is the most important component of a military, and drones should be used to save human capital. Ships are equipped to be standalone fighting forces, and air superiority will have money and force dominance unless met with aerial defense systems or missiles. Cyber hacking is a nuisance to the enemy, and intelligence and sabotage has a similar effect. Attacking an enemy and defending positions while having an integrated system that allows for air, land, and sea coordination is the primary means for winning wars in the modern era, unless of course you use nuclear or electromagnetic weapons to maximize devastation. And finally, a steady stream of supplies and ammunition is an omnipotent role for winning a war. Any war can be won with enough weapons and explosives. Pause. Okay, so that was on war, and that finishes the first half, the first half of the first book, or the first half of the first great part. The next part's on spiritual revelations. We're on page 58 of about 190. Okay, so spiritual revelations. Well, I'm going to do the future of government after the war section and miscellaneous remarks. Spiritual revelations. Okay. Before launching into the following sections, take a moment to reflect on the fact that there are many different religions around the world and that no religion is objectively factual. The author does a grand job at dramatically conceptualizing his theory about God, but please note that this is a very controversial subject and all material that follows should be taken with an open heart and mind. It is the inspiration garnered from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan that leads the author to write about God at length. But every politician needs to have the wherewithal to find for themselves a concept of God or a higher power. Please do not, as the reader, turn away from this work of writing based on the following sections and take the following as a guiding rock to precepts about God. It should also be noted that the author is a staunch Christian, but still believes in evolution, which is rationalized in one of the following paragraphs, and enjoys scientific discovery as much as theological pursuits. The God of Abraham is good. The God of Abraham is good is the title of this chapter. There have been many people throughout the history of humanity who have taken deep dives into differentiating between what is good and evil and whether humans are inherently good or evil, and many books and works have been devoted to such. It seems that it may depend on whether an individual is an optimist or a pessimist in determining such, but it still stands that the God of Abraham, or the Bible as we understand him, tells us that humans are of a sinful nature. This is more complicated than it appears on the surface, and is even further complicated when delving into whether free will rules over humanity or whether there is some form of destiny or divine intervention in each individual. First, looking at free will, it is obvious that humans have free will, and it can be deemed a universal fact that they do. Since an individual can make arduous decisions and has the ability to critically think and then execute their own desires without the existence of a higher power communing in human life, it would seem that free will would be the only thing to exist, and there would be no divine intervention. However, there is a spiritual sense amongst many, and many report that a divine intervention exists. Humans are always seeking the meaning of life, and the Bible itself explains that there is a God who is all-powerful. Religion explains that there is a destiny for some, if not all, individuals on earth. So how can we rationalize that free will always exists, while, as many believe, all humans have a destiny and many share destinies that intertwine? It is the long-term and short-term realizations throughout an individual's experience of living with free will that show that there is an overall destiny and divine intervention at hand. An individual can go 30 years or less or more without realizing and then realizing that God has intervened in their life to put them exactly where they ought to be. And it is the simple fact of where an individual is in space and time that may make them realize that all moments of free will have led them to their current existence, which therefore would mean all instances of their free will were predetermined. Of course, with all things related to a spiritual realm and dealing with the higher power that many call God, it can be a simple absolute or a complex nuance. Now, as to whether humans are inherently good or evil, again, it is not always an absolute and can be and is complex. The Bible explains that humans are sinful and that we only continue to exist because of the life and death of Jesus Christ. But even without Christianity, it can be argued by many and is that humans are of an evil nature. This is wrong. If put to an absolute, humans are good, being the opposite of evil overall. Of course, humans perform evil acts and are sinful, at least to some degree, which satisfies that we are sinful in a biblical sense. But humanity, if believing in God, must overall do good if we are to have a God of good, being not evil. The soul is not meant to perform evil continuously, it must strive for good. It is almost always easier and more convenient to do evil in an individual's own life, but when put into a society with others who are the same, naturally it is easier to do good as a means of an easier existence. This obviously depends on the definition of good and evil, but for the purposes of this book, good would be the improvement of reality compared to the deterioration of reality as humans understand such concepts in the 21st century. It is the belief that God is good that determines the view that humans came from good and are meant to do good, evil being the lazy route to prosperity, and goodness being derived from the difficult challenge of being upright, righteous, and just, and continuously seeking to do so. That divine intervention is good, as the challenge to do good is good, and the free will to do good is good, and having free will we deem as good in every instance. Evil is the instance of which evil is performed, and our isolated incidents as humans who are in fact existing in society can observe, therefore the argument that humans are good is apparent. If it be that divine intervention is the reason that humans seek good and is the challenge to do so, and that free will, if it were the only thing to exist, humans would then only do evil mostly, then there would exist a conundrum because in a natural instance we only seek free will as good, and being enslaved to another device or entity as being evil. Now, in an individual sense, without the existence of society or other individuals, good is the improvement of reality for the individual, which is their natural pursuit, while evil is the deterioration of their reality, and avoidance of such is the individual's natural pursuit. Then again, the argument in this case, from a purely natural sense, humans are good, is apparent. From this point of view, it is only the improvement in the existence of a pursuit that is evidence that humanity is of a good nature, and thence the argument of whether humans are good or evil continues, as this argument is based on definitions and does not take into account the reality that was used as a basis for forming the opinion or reality of this long manifesto. Okay, so history of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Before continuing further, it should be explained that the author believes in both spiritual warfare and rationalizing the God of Israel with the God of the universe to explain that he is somehow both, but more importantly, spreads his influence over other gods or otherwise that might live in the spiritual plane. This means that the God of Israel spreads from Israel to reach deities in India and the New World, for example, or fighting against the deities of Persia, Babylon, and otherwise in the Old Testament, and even decimating Zeus and the Greeks in the New Testament. So, ready for this? Something sinister, inherently evil, corrupt, and despicable lies beneath the earth's surface, not under the dust, but in the metaphysical shadows of humanity. Under the cheery emotions of the day, there is hatred, malice, jealousy, confusion, and all other negative emotions which contribute to one's perception. This perception is a lens covered by a prism into the spiritual realm and can provide insight into metaphorical light and darkness. Emotions reflect the spiritual realm, and it is hypothetically one of the four primary contributors to the soul, those being the mind, body, spiritual connection, and emotions. The mind rationalizes all the interpretations of the senses in addition to everything not covered by them, and the body is the dot one occupies in space and time. God is the creator of the soul, and only he, if gender be applied, can judge that of which he created. Humanity learned long ago that contributions to the experience of reality extended from the mind, body, soul, and emotions. Whether it was an ancient civilization, it does not matter, but awareness of this knowledge spans the earth from South America to Asia for the past 5,000 years. It was the Egyptians, though, that harnessed darkness early, the first grand perpetrators of slavery, playing on the delicate balance that lies between the mind and body, predating the revelations of spirit delivered by the God of Israel, and emotions which ceased to be free as the body was held in slavery. It is slavery that built the pyramids and the other great works of the Egyptians, and it was this caste system that held up individuals of immense power. The pharaohs of Egypt might have existed amongst close seconds in places such as China, which has a divine existence as the shadow of the kingdom of God. But it is the pharaohs of Egypt that first dabbled in the true aesthetic of evil, the oppression resulting from power. As a precursor of information, make it known that this evil power of slavery was a degrading practice, systematically corrupting and manipulating the mind, body, spirit, and emotions as other civilizations had done. But the Egyptians were worse. They disregarded knowledge and purified themselves in vampiric power lust that drove 1 to 3 individuals to enslave the massive populations of the Nile. They used the spiritual realm to conquer the body according to the books of Moses, and religious studies from a rational articulation tell us that the Egyptians truly worshipped divine leaders. So evil was the contempt of the Egyptians, though, that an opposite to their ambition was stirred, and the God of Israel, manifested in the Spirit, came to free the enslaved. It was the decimation of emotions that pricked the ears of God, and his people had to be freed from the priesthoods of the Pharaoh. This power of divinity left Egypt and was to be established at the heart of God's kingdom, Jerusalem. Covenants were made, and God would be the king over all the land and establish his domain with a throne in Zion. He is the creator after all, and his existence is the universal fact of him being the one and only true God. catered to by angels and having power over all domains of matter, senses, knowledge, creation, and everything not listed as characteristics, God began his work on formulating a perfect political system to constrain power and do good. Starting with the exiled hill people, the Jewish people in the stories of the Bible, born out of the darkness that is the demonic plane, buried deep in the hearts of entombed souls at the pit of the pyramids, God quickly realized he was too powerful to be king and quickly gathered frustration with the relatively simple beings. So throughout the stories of the Bible, he exists in the land of Israel, monitoring, promoting his works and being through the synagogues and kings of Israel and Judea. His failed attempt at being king lies in the ghost of God being contained in the Ark of the Covenant and then later in Solomon's temple. This power of the spiritual realm lived in Israel for all eternity and worked wonders through human designs of self-governance. The great experiment of human politics was miniaturized in the land of the Jews and is recorded in the Bible. God's playground extended further than the bounds of stories, however, and the wars of Babylon, Persia, and Alexander raged around the political map of Jerusalem, Judea, and Israel. The Spirit of God was involved and observed both war and peace around his home, learning from the power achieved by human God kings. Please understand that God had future designs and therefore spent time appreciating and nurturing the scientific progression of the world, specifically the musings of the Greeks. Darkness of violence and greed swept through the land, though, but light was coming. Jesus would soon grace the world with his presence, and God would establish himself again over all the earth. In preparation and to be holy forever and ever, Rome emerged as a triumphant and glorious empire, the first of the just, and established power unrivaled unto the evils of Genghis Khan and the holy righteousness of the British Empire. Roman empires Roman emperors of infinite mortal power, in like fashion as those recounted in the kings of the Bible, ruled and unruled, either being favored and unfavored, all to have a kingdom prepared as a propellant to proclaim God's kingdom and gloriously holy name. The Son of God was born, Jesus was born, and performed miracles throughout Israel. Whether this enumeration be interrupted by science, let it be known that the conclusion of the fact remains the same, regardless of whether the spiritual pronouncement of the message of the most glorious personified in the body of Jesus Christ was ethereal and celestial or not. It does not matter. Multiple universes and dimensions are but simple ponderings for the God of Israel, and the universe and dimension of the Son of God, Jesus Christ, is of this one and of God's, and of the readers, as exemplified later in the text of Muhammad. Now the people of Rome were favored by God after the crucifixion of Jesus because they worked in the physical plane with the metaphysical plane, that of mind and spiritual existence working cooperatively, and the great power to rule the known world was held surrounding the Mediterranean. The birth of God's kingdom and the power of the New Testament revolve around the standard for counting time, the life of Christ. From 32 AD to 2026, God's kingdom has existed among humanity. But it took much effort in the celestial plane to reach the half of the current population on earth that reside in God's kingdom, as it exists today, being that half the world is either devout Christian or devout Muslim or unlikely Jewish at this writing. Muhammad provided the voice of God to the world 700 years after the miracles of the Messiah and Son of God, Jesus Christ, but may be considered the holiest of prophets and Messiah in his own right. Muhammad, through the fiery reflection of God's will and the textual interpretation and physical pronouncement, imparted God's mind, body, and emotion and soul into every individual who radicalized themselves with the new ideals of Islam. The religion of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, personified by Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and all other beings on earth that exist for the grace of God on a physical and colloquial level, is one that exists in a singular spiritual plane, but not a prison for God by any means. And we'll continue that in the next video.